Um, Let me tell you where the skyscraper museum is before I start about Jean Nouvel. We are in Battery Park City at the southern end of Battery Park, so lower Manhattan, about as far south as you can go in Battery Park City, where we have a small gallery, a little bigger than this, but nevertheless, open on Wednesday through Saturday. We're free from noon to 6, so I hope you'll come down. Has anybody been there yet? Okay, good. Thank you. Well, leave a parade down there. Thank you. And we have our own programs as well. So check our website.
And your walking tours.
And walking tours of Battery Park in the summertime. So check our website for that. But here for the subject of the evening, Monsieur Jean Nouvel, a great architect and someone who I have admired for a long time. In fact, I met him twice, and the first occasion was when I was in graduate school, and I think it was, I don't even know, I remember the occasion, and I'm wearing my red scarf in honor of him tonight, or in empathy with him tonight, because I went to a lecture that he gave in the Custom House down in Lower Manhattan, and it was organized maybe by Municipal Art Society or something like that. I cannot remember the date, but it has to be at least 35 or 40 years ago. And I was with my some of my graduate school friends, and Barry Bergdahl, who was the hand-me-down connection for this evening, but I think appropriate since Jean Nouvel in New York is really about high rises and skyscrapers and high-rise buildings. So that's a connection that I want to make. But we went to his lecture. We heard him talk about I think the Institut du Monde Arabe, as well as many other of his projects, and were swept away by his passion and his work. And when he was walking down the stairs to the Custom House, we ran up to him in order to say how much we admired Monsieur Nouvel. So that was my introduction really to him as a live performer. And then I met him again when he was testifying before the Landmarks Preservation Commission and City Planning Commission about the MoMA Tower at 53 West 53rd, which is one of the buildings on the screen here. And he had to get, or his lawyers and his PR people had to present the project, which I'll show you later in some slides, for review by the City Planning Commission, because there was a zoning issue. And so he came in order to perform. Alas, he did not convince Amanda Burden, the chair of the City Planning Commission, and she cut 200 feet off the top of his tower. But now those towers have become very controversial, and I'm not here to defend that. Well, I am here to defend that one for its aesthetics, but I'm not here to defend them as a solution to housing in New York, but only to explain them in terms of zoning and issues, contemporary issues. But I think that the MoMA Tower, or the Tour de Verre, as the Atelier calls it, is one of the finest of those buildings, and most particularly suited to the history of New York. So I love this photograph, and the slides I'm going to show you are mostly all pirated off of Jean Nouvel's own website. So they're very good photography, and they're in the approved presentation, like this exhibition of his work. This one is from another source, but I think it's very clever in the way that it suggests as he calls himself, like an architect of many faces, because his works don't have a signature style. They look different from each other, and they are particular to a place, as he likes to insist. But I think there are certain themes that you can see in his work, certain resonances that unite them and make them very identifiable as a Jean Nouvel project. But here he is reflected in the mirror, and with his signature black. But also the red, the kind of red and the black, the Les Miserables kind of, presentation of the passion and belief. So I think that photograph really summarizes him. And Francois suggested that speaking about him a little bit in the context of this concept that we came to be called in the like 1990s, early 2000s, especially starchitects. You know, these are architects who are designers with a brand name, a kind of brand identity that made them identifiable, consumable, promotional in a lot of ways that was really, I think, necessary to the culture of architecture in getting commissions. And so with his peers at the time, who are all lined up here in their set of a dozen years of the Pritzker Prize, Jean Nouvel won it in 2008, as you see there, with his kind of contemporaries and colleagues, like you can read the names Richard Rogers and Norman Foster and Rem Koolhaas and Herzog and de Meuron. These are architects who have a very clear identity, who have both a personality and a reputation as being designers who not just are prize winners, but who are particular, who are individuals, who have a signature style. And of course, I just need to mention that the one woman, after 25 years, Zaha Hadid, finally makes her way onto the Pritzker wall in 2004. The prizes started in 1999. From the Atelier's website, this is not the most inspiring view in terms of the color of the sky and the water of the New York skyline, but you see here the 111th Avenue building, right next to Frank Gehry's this kind of imagery of sailboat sails, and the kind of formalist expression that puts the two of them who are friends together. And in fact, apparently, Frank Gehry was the kind of special advocate for including Jean Nouvel among the Pritzker laureates. A view of the skyline, and this looks like an architectural rendering, but it is in fact a photograph with his Tour de Verre, or the MoMA Tower, as I think most people in the architectural world call it, because there's a gallery in the bottom that's devoted to Museum of Modern Art galleries. That form, which I'll talk about later, because we'll look at it in a kind of chronological unfolding of his interest in in formal devices, but also in connection to his New York commissions. We'll come back to this, but that view on the skyline shows his presence and asserts his presence, and also kind of establishes his puts his stake, his flag into the ground of the New York skyline, which is a dream that he had, of course, and that many architects have, to make a kind of exclamation point within the New York skyline that is identified, and his is certainly identified with him, not an anonymous tower at all. I'd be delighted to have the lights off. Yeah,
a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to look at key commissions in the decades of the kind of trajectory of his career. He graduated, great, even better. Yeah. He attended the École des Beaux-Arts, which he didn't really want to do. He decided to be an architect because his parents did not want him to be a painter, which is his first love. He went to the École during the years of revolution. He protested and rioted in the streets of Paris, along with a number of other architects to whom that is their claim to fame and their kind of position, their political position. Bernard Tschumi, who became the dean of GSAP, the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, Preservation at Columbia, was another one of those comrades in arms. And typical of French, and I think a point of pride for Jean Nouvel is that he so disliked the kind of rigor and what he thought was the doctrinaire lack of imagination in the curriculum of the École des Beaux-Arts that he refused to do the drawings that were required for his diplome. And instead, he presented a typewritten text. And apparently he had to stay a bit longer at school in order to finally get his diploma. But his revolutionary and contrarian view of contemporary conventional architecture was something that is an identity that stuck with him through his career. This building is, of course, the Institut du Monde Arabe. It was won in a competition, as is common in France, to have public projects, large and small. It could be a firehouse, it could be a school, in this case, a cultural institution. And this was the building that really set his career into the international press and a stature that made him compete on the world stage of architecture. It's interesting to look at his drawings here. This looks very much like any of the works of the 1980s that one might find in architecture schools or architecture magazines. But the thing that really makes this project different is this gridded wall, which here looks perhaps like conventional windows, but when you're on the inside, how many have been inside the Institute? Not that it's definitely worth going. It's a public mixed use institution, so there are galleries and libraries and cafes and offices there, but you would definitely want to go to the museum. You can see that that wall is like a Murab screen with each one of these metallic openings, a kind of lenticular lens that opens and closes like the diaphragm of a camera. And so when the sun is strong, supposedly automatically, it doesn't work all that often, I mean, perfectly all that often, but the lens will close up. So they're just these spots of light. And when on a gray day, a cloudy day, they'll open wide. So like an eye does the same with that same character, but they're made of metal and extraordinarily beautiful and decorative and geometric in the way that Islamic architecture is founded in with kind of fundamentally geometric principles and multiplication of complexities of geometries. Another project also gridded, and one is tempted to say Descartes when you see the Cartesian grids that keep reappearing in Nouvel's work, is the Cartier Foundation, of course. And this screen of glass, and then in its various guises in changing light, internal light and exterior sunlight, the kind of changing colors and hues that glass is very adept at reflectivity and taking the colors of the sky. You can see how that grid takes on various characters, but has a kind of fundamental technology that underlies it, undergirds it, in order to create this thin, transparent screen. And that is a feature that goes into the galleries and into the offices that is extraordinarily clean and pristine and elegant. Glass is a material with which he plays a great deal, but then as you'll see, there are walls too, with openings in walls, where solidity is the opposite aesthetic. This tower, so I thought I would pick the skyscrapers, which are more of my specialty, but they are also one of his, though we don't always associate him with skyscrapers. This is the Akbar Tower in Barcelona, which, as you can see, is extremely colorful. The color and the passion beyond red, and actually red and blue are two of the hues that he puts into play in glass and in facade decoration, in pattern work and also in geometries. You can see how the exterior armature of metal is something that connects to all the rest of the work that we've been looking at. But inside, you see the grid becomes small And whether it's in this more public space or in offices that have much lower ceilings, you get this kind of pattern work and opportunities to look out, which is also very key because the inside-outside relationship of Nouvel is something that he really prizes and that he places through his experience of the space. First, his imagined experience of what the space is, but as we'll see in the New York buildings, there are views that frame the city, so it's like a picture window onto the urban scene. Another project, this was finished a little later, but started around 2006. So we're looking in the years before his Pritzker Prize at all of these projects from the 1980s, 90s, and here in very early 2000s. This is a tower, a mixed-use tower in Marseille called La Marseillaise. And you can see that it has this very extraordinary pattern on it, whatever one thinks of it, a fire and a flame or a flight of birds. There are all kinds of analogies that you might bring to it. But when you look close, you see the characteristic of Nouvel in the intricacy of the geometries and the grids. In this case, it is more like the Cartesian grid, but the effect from a distance is something so different than what you see when you come up close or when you're on the inside looking out. And this is very characteristic of his work. A gorgeous photograph. Now here in New York, 40 Mercer down, a few blocks from here down Broadway, is another glass house. It is a grid and grids inside of a grid with a lot of glass screens. And, if you're walking down Broadway, the courtyard, which sets this building, which is on a corner, apart from its adjacent commercial old 19th century storefront, is a glass screen. And then there's a courtyard behind that, unfortunately, making it less accessible to the general public. But that is the trick of commercial developers who know how to make a place that is public seem private and also elegant and expensive. When you're on the inside, and I was going to use the word confess, but I admit that, or I advise that one of the great ways to learn about architecture is to go to YouTube and to see what you can find with the architect's own lectures, whether they're at schools of architecture. In this case, the Pritzker Award acceptance speech is on the website for the Pritzker Prize. And Jean Nouvel gives about a 20-minute, probably more than 20-minute speech, which I printed out right here, which has lots of very quotable quotes and very poetic phrases and acknowledgments to the philosophers and contemporary philosopher writers within his orbit in Paris, and especially Michel Foucault and Baudrillard, who were heroes and in some cases friends of his. And one thing that you learn when you hear these, whether it's a promotional literature film for this particular commercial condominium development, or whether it's something where it's a planned lecture to be delivered by Nouvel himself, the way that he talks about his architecture and the way that architects in general speak about their work is a much better way than listening to critics. I'm a historian, not a critic, so I'm not going to really give you my opinion so much. Although I'm celebrating him and I'm conveying, I hope, my admiration for his work. But he does talk about framing, about inside and out, and that hint of sapphire blue, kind of jewel-like up in the corner, is something that you see throughout this work and the other New York projects. So it's like he puts you into a film when you go into a space. You're in the room, but you're seeing something whether it's on a screen or it's a movie or the city gives you entertainment within that frame. Now, lest we think that everything is a grid, 111th Avenue is this project, which is right next to the Frank Gehry. What is the AIG? Yeah, it was the AEC, Barry Diller's headquarters, and as I said, it's supposed to look like the sails of sailboats on the Hudson billowing out. These two buildings together make a suite of starchitecture in New York, which was in a lot of magazines and is really something to treasure. And Nouvel is probably the less appreciated of the two, but I think what you can see in the complementary character of them is the sense of artistic composition and even bricolage kind of kind of mosaic of pasting together, which is even carried out not just in color, but in angles, as you can see here, the direction of the rotation, because those little windows were all chosen by him and composed into that kind of tilted, glinting effect in order to activate the surface of the building in the light. So the light on the water and ship sails is one way to respond to the sight, but this is another, to take the light from the sky, which is so important over on West Street, and the sunset as you look west is something to reflect. And then also the way he framed the city through all of those individual windows. Now the MoMA Tower of West 53rd Street has at its crest, you can see also, I don't know if you noticed it in the city, but it has coloration, right? There's a bronze and a black and a silver character as the building rises out of 53rd Street. And the higher you go, it's kind of variegated, so it pulls up as if it's kind of glowing in the sun. And sorry, that diagonals that you see here are inspired, as Jean Nouvel clearly stated, by one of the great New York 1920s architects, except he wasn't a builder. He was an architectural delineator, Hugh Ferris. And this is one of 4 drawings that are the zoning envelope of the 1916 zoning envelope. I could easily tell you an hour's worth of detail about this, but this is stage 2, where the diagonals of the street that are required in the zoning law are also the diagonals of light that are coming down from the sky. So this is an image of if you took the zoning law and you turned a lot into a block of clay, and then you sliced off the parts that were required by law. And then there are other stages of this where it turns into a rectilinear one. But it was the diagonals in this case, and this drawing, which so inspired Jean Nouvel. And as you can see, the way that this kind of bend and tilt as the building rises has that sense of lift, but also a kind of sculptural character that he thought was characteristic of New York, of the great New York towers of the 1920s. And it's kind of fun to see what had been approved by the zoning law, which changed in 1961 for the maximum amount of space that was allowed on the site. And then you buy what happens with the Billionaires Row type super slender buildings is you buy the adjacent air rights from the next door buildings, which are which have been undeveloped, and you can pile them on top of your site. And then the ones that you bought that had no buildings on it, must remain low, and your tower can rise uninterrupted. It can rise into the sky with as many square feet as you purchased in order to put onto that site, and it then becomes solitary and magnificent and unchallenged by any of its neighbors. And so what was allowed by law is the one over on this side. Once they bought some air rights, but then they also stretched it up so that that tower could have looked like a dumpy little tower like this, but instead it soars and it's sculpted in a way that is, I think, quite aesthetically brilliant. But it also offended the chair of the City Planning Commission, who found it too tall and didn't want, as she stated, didn't want the height of this tower to challenge the height of the Chrysler building. It was to have been 1,250 feet, and she cut it down to 1,050 feet. And so this is what it would have looked like, but instead it got cut off to be like you see it here. Nevertheless, a real stunning building, I think. And seeing them from the park, these are the characteristic buildings of the 2000, basically 2012s forward. So as I said, and I'm going to conclude in a moment, the Pritzker Prize was awarded to Jean Nouvel in 2008. And I really do recommend the lecture or the acceptance speech that he gave, which is extremely poetic. He had been receiving many, many commissions, but there were a few other large-scale or tall building commissions that he executed after the Pritzker, and certainly that gave his practice a great boost. This one, and around the world, so this one is in Sydney, Australia, and it's called One Central Park, right? And I wanted to show it because it shows another aspect of his work, not otherwise illustrated here, is the incorporation of nature and sustainability issues into the tower. And you see in that drawing the intention, and that glowing white in the center is a heliotrope. So in order to get sunlight, it reflects the sunlight, the Sydney, Australia sunlight, with the sun that comes up in the north. It reflects down into a courtyard of a commercial space below, and it helps to grow the plants that are underneath that. An interesting projection. And then, of course, the large-scale projects in the Middle East, the institutional buildings, the museums in Abu Dhabi and in Qatar that you see here. Extraordinary, poetic, evocative forms, unexpected, mosaic over with a kind of terracotta tile in order to kind of merge like maybe seashells, sand dollars or something in the sand along the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Sea. And in Abu Dhabi, the same kind of screen, this tends to look a little more organic than geometric, but you can see the idea of a sunshade or a brise soleil is something that is particularly important to the Middle East and for practical terms of sunshade, but also makes the most dramatic effect as this giant canopy kind of breaks up and diffuses the light. Then the building exists at kind of a human scale and not a scale of art under that great, almost like sports hall kind of canopy. And then one final skyscraper, which is in Doha, called a high-rise office building, which I think it makes clear the connection to place, which Jean Nouvel thinks is so important, because when he says context, he doesn't mean vernacular or local. He's looking for a kind of poetic relationship to place, and in Doha, that is again to Islamic architecture, even though this is a tower with a very practical, everyday, mundane kind of existence. It's not religious, it's not aspirational. This project is early compared to the skyline that I think you see here, which I think makes clear where his contemporaries and competitors fall behind him in quality and expression. So those filled out over time. But when you come to the top of the space like this, when you see the relationship back more than 30 years to the Institut de Montarabe, you can see the way the kind of mechanics of the screen as well as the geometries work in order to achieve a really extraordinary beauty and a kind of meaningful architecture that you see. And this, which seems like a very appropriate last image.